Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well tonight. This evening, we are going to read through chapter 29 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. If this is your first time watching, we aren't just going to read the words, we're going to stop and talk about interesting words and phrases as we encounter them. So if you are an advanced learner of English, this is a great way to learn new vocabulary and to learn new phrases and expressions. If you are watching this live with me, then I encourage you to make questions in the comments. If there's a word that you don't understand or a phrase that isn't clear, please ask in the comments, and I will be happy to talk about those words or phrases with you. That's what makes watching this video different and interesting from just playing the audiobook. All right, so let's get started with chapter 29 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. I visit Steerforth at his home again. I mentioned to Mr. Spenlow in the morning that I wanted leave of absence for a short time. This phrase, leave of absence, means an extended time away from your work. So if you're sick and you don't work for 2 or 3 days, that is not a leave of absence. But at least in modern English, a leave of absence maybe is 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month, probably because you're very sick and in the hospital. So it's a little bit, I don't know if they're using it in a different way in this book, because this is 170 years ago. But maybe it means something a little bit different in this period. But at least we can understand that Davy is asking for some time away from work, because Mr. Spenlow is his employer. I mentioned to Mr. Spenlow in the morning that I wanted leave of absence for a short time, and as I was not in the receipt of any salary, and consequently was not obnoxious to the implacable Mr. Jorkins, there was no difficulty about it. So Davy is saying, since they don't pay me, it shouldn't be a problem. And he uses the word implacable. Let's just take a look at that word, implacable. Unable to be placated. Placated maybe means like satisfied. So implacable means never satisfied, never happy. I took that opportunity, with my voice sticking in my throat, and my sight failing, as I uttered the words, to express my hope that Miss Spenlow was quite well, to which Mr. Spenlow replied with no more emotion than if he had been speaking of an ordinary human being, that he was much obliged to me, and she was very well. Davy is in love with his boss's daughter. His boss is a very rich man, so this is a big no-no. But he doesn't realize that... So Davy's asking, how's your daughter? And Mr. Spenlow doesn't realize that Davy's in love with her. So he says, she's fine, thanks for asking. We articled clerks, as germs of the patrician order of proctors, were treated with so much consideration that I was almost my own master at all times. As I did not care, however, to get to Highgate before 1 or 2 o'clock in the day, as we had another little excommunication case in court that morning, which was called the office of the judge promoted by Tipkins against Bullock for his soul's correction. I passed an hour or 2 in attendance on it with Mr. Spenlow, very agreeably. It arose out of a scuffle. A scuffle is like a little fight, a little argument. It arose out of a scuffle between 2 church wardens, one of whom was alleged to have pushed the other against a pump, the handle of which pump, projecting into a schoolhouse, which schoolhouse was under a gable of the church roof, made the push an ecclesiastical offense. So these two guys were having a fight, and one guy pushed another guy, and because this act happened, or the guy landed into a school that was run by the church, it becomes a matter for the church, and that's why Davy is involved with it, because these lawyers have a very strange specialty of legality in the church. It was an amusing case, and sent me up to Highgate on the box of the stagecoach, thinking about the Commons and what Mr. Spenlow had said about touching the Commons and bringing down the country. Mrs. Steerforth was pleased to see me, and so was Rosa Dartle. I was agreeably surprised to find that Littimer was not there, and that we were attended by a modest little parlour-maid with blue ribbons in her cap, whose eye it was much more pleasant and much less disconcerting to catch by accident than the eye of that respectable man. If you haven't been following the story, Littimer is the servant of Davy's friend, Steerforth, and he's a very intimidating person because he's very perfect. He's extremely perfect. He's the perfect servant. And Davy is very young and inexperienced, so he feels inferior to this servant when he's around, because he feels like Littimer is a much better, more ideal person than Davy is. So he was very happy to see that Littimer would not be serving that evening. There was just a servant girl who would be serving them, because he always feels very uncomfortable around Littimer. I particularly observed, before I had been half an hour in the house, was the close and attentive watch Miss Dartle kept upon me, and the lurking manner in which she seemed to compare my face with Steerforth's, and Steerforth's with mine. So Miss Dartle is sitting there looking at Davy's face, and then she's looking at Steerforth's face, and then she's looking at Davy's face. She's a very strange and annoying woman. And to lie in wait for something to come up between the two. So it seems like she's just waiting for one of them to say the wrong thing so she can jump on it. So surely as I looked towards her, did I see that eager visage, with its gaunt black eyes, searching brow, intent on mine, or passing suddenly from mine to Steerforth's, or comprehending both of us at once. In this lynx-like scrutiny, she was so far from faltering when she saw I observed it, that at such time she only fixed her piercing look upon me with more intent expression still. Blameless as I was, and knew that I was, in reference to any wrong she could possibly suspect me of, I shrunk before her eyes. So she's staring, she's just waiting for something to happen, waiting for him to say the wrong thing. And Davy is looking at her like, why are you staring at me? But this doesn't make her uncomfortable. It just makes her stare more. It just makes her concentrate more on his face. And it's making Davy feel uncomfortable. It's making him shrink back into his chair. I shrunk before her strange eyes, quite unable to endure their hungry luster. All day she seemed to pervade the whole house. If I talked to Steerforth in his room, I heard her dress rustle in the little gallery outside. Rustling is the sound of clothes moving against each other. I don't know if I can make a rustling sound. This is rustling. Can you hear that? So imagine this is about, 170 years ago. Women wore very big dresses, a lot of material. So if they're walking, you can hear a lot of rustling. So he's saying, if I'm in Steerforth's room, we're talking in his room, the door is closed, but outside I can hear the of her dress, the rustling of her dress. And by the way, when the wind is blowing and the leaves of the trees are moving and making noise, that sound is also called rustling. The rustling of the leaves of the tree. I heard her dress rustle in the little gallery outside. When he and I engaged in some of our old exercises on the lawn behind the house, I saw her face pass from window to window. So they're outside, and you can see her face going from one room to the other room, looking out the window, watching them. Like a wandering light. PV says this is true, authentic English. It sure is, PV. Make sure that if you have a question while you're watching, if you don't understand a word or a phrase, make sure to ask in the comments, and I will be happy to explain it to you. If I know. This is pretty complicated. Like a wandering light until it fixed itself in one and watched us. When we all four went out walking in the afternoon, she closed her thin hand on my arm like a spring to keep me back while Steerforth and his mother went out of hearing, and then spoke to me. "You've been a long time," she said, "without coming here. Is your profession really so engaging and interesting as to absorb your whole attention? I ask, because I always want to be informed when I am ignorant. Is it really, though?" So Miss Dartle is saying, you never come and visit us. Why don't you? Are you so busy at your job that you don't want to come and visit us? I'm just asking because I'm curious. I just like to know things if I don't know the answer. I replied that I liked it well enough, but that I certainly could not claim so much for it. "Oh, I am glad to know that, because I always like to be put right when I am wrong," said Rosa Dartle. You mean it is a little dry, perhaps?" "Well," I replied, "perhaps it was a little dry." "Oh, and that's a reason why you want relief and change, excitement, and all that," said she. "Ah, very true. But it isn't a little, for him. I don't mean you." A quick glance of her eye towards the spot where Steerforth was walking with his mother, leaning on his arm, showed me whom she meant. But beyond that, I was quite lost, and I looked so, I have no doubt. Yeah, I'm not really sure what she's talking about either. If something is dry, that's another way of calling something boring. So if I think what she means is your work is dry. Your work is boring. It's not stimulating. Let's reread that. I replied, I liked it well enough. I liked my job well enough, but that I certainly could not claim so much for it. Meaning, I enjoyed my job, but I'm not really that busy. "Oh, I'm glad to know that, because I always like to be put right when I am wrong. To put someone right is to correct them. I always like to be corrected when I'm wrong," said Rosa Dartle. "You mean it is a little dry, perhaps?" So she's saying your job is a little boring, perhaps? "Well," I replied, "perhaps it was a little dry. Perhaps it's a little boring." "Oh, and that's a reason why you want relief and change, excitement and all of that." So I guess the excitement was going to Steerforth's mother for the weekend? I don't know. Where's the excitement? I'm not sure why she's talking about excitement. "Ah, very true. But isn't it a little... for him? I don't mean you." So she's saying... I don't know what she's saying, and Davy doesn't know either, but she's saying, isn't it for him? She's gesturing towards Steerforth. "Isn't it a little..." and she doesn't say what. "For him?" A quick glance of her eye towards the spot where Steerforth was walking with his mother leaning on his arm, showed me whom she meant, but beyond that I was quite lost, and looks so, I have no doubt. Don't it? I don't say that it does. Mind, I want to know, don't it rather engross him? Don't it make him perhaps a little more remiss than usual in his visits to his blindly doting With another quick glance at them, and such a glance at me as seemed to look into my innermost thoughts. I don't know what she's hinting at something, like maybe he's taking advantage of his mother. Doting is when you love something too much that you can't see anything wrong with it. You can't. So she loves her son so much she could never see him doing anything wrong. Even if he did a horrible thing, she would find a way to make it okay. If he murdered someone, she would probably blame the other person and say it's their fault. So she loves him. She dotes over him. She always gives him intense love, and she can't see him doing anything wrong. And Rosa even Miss Dartle even calls her blindly doting, meaning she can't see the truth. She loves him too much to see the truth. But she doesn't say what's happening, so I don't know what she's referring to. Let's read that again. Don't it? I don't say that it does. Mind, I want to know. Don't it rather engross him? To be engrossed means to take all of your attention. So if you're engrossed in a book, you don't notice anything else outside of the book. So it's like completely concentrated, taking all of your attention. But I don't know what she's talking about. I don't know why she's saying this. The sentence doesn't make sense to me. Don't it make him perhaps a little more remiss than usual in his visits to his blindly doting? So something is happening that is preventing him from... To be remiss in something means like neglecting something. So she's saying he's neglecting visiting his blindly doting mother. But I don't know what the it is. PV says, how does Dickens explore the tension between idealized love and the realities of human relationships? What does this suggest about the nature of true happiness? Well, that's a very deep question, PV. How does Dickens explore the tension between idealized love and the realities of human relationships? What does this suggest about the true nature of happiness? Well, I don't know. I think that when I'm reading this, I think he's pointing out a fault of his mother. That it's very obvious that his mother cannot see the wrong in him or the bad in him. But Davy also can't see that because Davy loves him very much too. And he can't see, even though others around him are trying to tell him that Steerforth is not a good person. Miss Dartle, I returned, pray do not think. I don't, she said. Oh, dear me, don't suppose that I think anything. I am not suspicious. I only ask a question. I don't state any opinion. I want to found an opinion on what you tell me then. It's not so? Well, I'm very glad to know it. It certainly is not the fact, said I, perplexed, that I am accountable for Steerforth's having been away from home longer than usual. Okay, so she's complaining that he doesn't visit his mother so much, and she wants to know, what is he doing? And Davy is like, I don't know. How do I know? If he has been, which I really don't know at this moment, unless I understand it from you, I have not seen him this long while until last night. No? Indeed, Miss Dartle, no. As she looked full at me, I saw her face grow sharper and paler, and the marks of the old wound lengthen out until cut through the disfigured lip, and deep into the nether lip, and slanted down her face. So this is actually an example of there's something wrong with Steerforth, because Miss Dartle has a big mark, a scar on her face. It goes all the way down her face. And one time Davy asked Steerforth, where did she get that from? And I don't remember exactly what happened, but Steerforth, when he was a little boy, just a little child, was very angry with her, and he threw something at her and hurt her very badly. But, I mean, this is kind of an indication that maybe Steerforth, even since he was a little boy, isn't exactly a very good person. What is he doing? I repeated the words, more to myself than her, being so amazed. What is he doing? What is he doing? With an eagerness that seemed enough to consume her like a fire. In what is that man assisting him, who never looks at me without an inscrutable falsehood in his eyes? So she's referring to Steerforth's servant. I just forgot his name now. I'm sure it will come up again. If you are honorable and faithful, I don't ask you to betray your friend. I ask you only to tell me, is it anger? Is it hatred? Is it pride? Is it restlessness? Is it some wild fancy? Is it love? What is it that is leading him? So she's saying, why does he stay away from home? What is he doing? You don't have to tell me the details. Just tell me, what is it? Is it hatred? Is it love? What is it? Miss Dartle, I returned, how shall I tell you so that you will believe me, that I know nothing in Steerforth different from what there was when I first came here? I can think of nothing. I firmly believe there is nothing. I hardly understand even what you mean. As she still stood, looking fixedly at me, and twitching or throbbing, from which I could not dissociate the idea of pain, came into that cruel mark. So the cruel mark, that's her scar that Steerforth gave her. And he says it's twitching. Twitching is an involuntary muscular movement like this. That's twitching. Throbbing is when there's a lot of blood running through your body, and then maybe your whole body, like imagine if you hit your hand and then your hand starts going like this, boom, 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 boom. So if you hit something and there's a lot of blood coming to it, it starts moving, it starts throbbing. So he's saying the scar was, I don't know, twitching or throbbing, one of those two things. As she still stood, looking fixedly at me, a twitching or throbbing, from which I could not dissociate the idea of pain, came into that cruel mark, and lifted up the corner of her lips, as if with scorn, or with pity that despised its object. She put her hand upon it hurriedly. A hand so thin and delicate, that when I had seen her hold it up before the fire to shade her face, I had compared in my thoughts to fine porcelain. And saying in a quick, fierce, passionate way, I swear you to secrecy about this, said not a word more. Mrs. Steerforth was particularly happy in her son's society, and Steerforth was, on this occasion, particularly attentive and respectful to her. It was very interesting to me to see them together, not only on account of their mutual affection, but because of the strong personal resemblance between them, and the manner in which they were, and in the manner in which was a haughty or impetus in him was softened by age and sex in her to a gracious dignity. So Davy is saying it's interesting to see them together because they look very much alike, except his mother is a more gentle person with more grace, which is something that Steerforth doesn't have. So it's interesting to see those qualities in her and maybe imagining them on him one day. Something like that, I think. I thought more than once that it was well no serious cause of division had ever come between them, or two such natures. I ought rather to express it, to such shades of the same nature, it might have been harder to reconcile that the two extremest opposites in creation, the idea did not originate in my own discernment, I am bound to confess, but in a speech of Rosa Dartle's. She said at dinner, "Oh, but do tell me, though, somebody, because I have been thinking about it all day, and I want to know." You want to know what, Rosa?" returned Mrs. Steerforth. Pray, Rosa, do not be so mysterious." "Mysterious!" she cried. "Oh, really? Do you consider me so?" "Do I constantly entreat you," said Mrs. Steerforth, "to speak plainly in your own natural manner?" "Oh, then this is not my natural manner," she rejoined. "Now you must really bear with me, because I ask for information. We never know ourselves." "It has become a second nature," said Mrs. Steerforth, without any displeasure. "But I remember, and so must you, I think, when your manner was different, Rosa, when it was not so guarded, and was more trustful." "I'm sure you're right," she returned, "and so it is that bad habits grow upon one. Really, less guarded and more trustful. How can I, imperceptibly, have changed, I wonder? Well, that's very odd. I must study to regain my former self." "I wish you would," said Mrs. Steerforth with a smile. "Oh, I really will. You know," she answered, "I will learn frankness from, let me see, from James." "You cannot learn frankness, Rosa," said Mrs. Steerforth quickly. "To be frank means to be very direct and very honest. And that's really the opposite of Miss Dartle. She's always just dropping hints and saying things very indirectly. Maybe that's why we couldn't really understand what she was trying to say to Davy earlier, because she's not direct. She's very indirect, and Davy didn't know either. And so being frank means being very direct and very honest. And Mrs. Steerforth is saying, you can't learn that. Nobody can teach that to you. You either are or you aren't. "You cannot learn frankness, Rosa," said Mrs. Steerforth quickly, for there was always some effect of sarcasm in what Rosa Dartle said. That's what I was thinking, that she's a very sarcastic person. She's always, no matter what you say to her, she says, "Really? Oh, really? Oh." It's funny. It's kind of annoying, though. She sounds like a very annoying person. Rosa Dartle said, though it was said, as this was, in the most unconscious manner in the world, in a better school. "That I am sure of," she answered, with an uncommon fervor. "If I am sure of anything, of course, you know, I am sure of that." Mrs. Steerforth appeared to me to regret having been a little nettled, for she presently said, in a kind tone, "Well, my dear Rosa, we have not heard what it is that you want to be satisfied about." "That I want to be satisfied about," she replied. You see, that's very annoying. It sounds sarcastic, like she doesn't even really mean it. "Oh, it was only whether people who are like each other in their moral constitution, is that the phrase?" "It's as good a phrase as another," said Steerforth. "Thank you. Whether people who are like each other in their moral constitution are in greater danger than people who are not so circumstanced." Supposing any serious cause of variance to arise between them of being divided angrily and deeply. I'm not sure what she's saying. Let's read that again. "Whether people who are like each other in their moral constitution, so whether people who are similar to each other, meaning having a good character, having a similarly good character, or maybe a similarly bad character, are in greater danger than people not so circumstanced." So whether people who are, let's just say good, whether people are good are in more danger than people who are not good. Supposing any serious cause of variance to arise between them, of being divided angrily and deeply. I should say yes, Steerforth. So Steerforth is saying nicer people are in more danger than bad people if there's a disagreement or a problem. That's my understanding. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I understand from this. Should you? She retorted. Dear me. Supposing then, for instance, any unlikely thing will do for supposition that you and your mother were to have a serious quarrel. My dear Rosa, interposed Miss Steerforth, laughing good-naturedly, suggest some other supposition. James and I know our duty to each other better, I pray heaven. Oh, said Mrs. Dartle, nodding her head thoughtfully. To be sure, that would prevent it. Why, of course, it would exactly. Now, I'm glad I've been so foolish as to put the case, for it is so very good to know that your duty to each other would prevent it. Thank you very much. So, Miss Dartle suspects something, and she thinks it could cause... I think this is what's happening. And she thinks it could cause a big problem between Mrs. Steerforth and her son. And now she's saying, oh, I'm so happy to know that you two are so devoted to each other that you could never fight about anything. But we don't know what it is that she suspects, but she thinks something is happening. One other little circumstance connected with Miss Dartle I must not omit, for I had reason to remember it thereafter. When all the irremediable past was rendered plain, during the whole of this day, remedy is like a cure or a fix. So if you remedy something, you are fixing something. This is not a word that you would use probably in modern English, but irremediable would mean you can't fix it. So talking about the irremediable past means the past that you can't change. You can't make it better. Uh-oh, my electricity just went out. Well, I think I probably have, I don't know if I should keep reading because you're going to hear that beep. That's my emergency battery. Well, maybe the electricity will come back on. All right. Oh yeah, my microphone is still working. Can you still hear me? Do you still hear me? I'll keep reading if you can still hear me. Can someone answer? Okay, well, I'll just keep reading, and if you can't hear me, let me know. Okay. One other little circumstance connected with dear Miss Dartle I must not omit, for I had reason to remember it thereafter when all the irremediable past was rendered plain. During the whole of this day, but especially from this period of it, Steerforth exerted himself with utmost skill, and that was his utmost with his utmost ease to charm this singular creature into a pleasant and pleased companion. That he should succeed with no matter of surprise to me. I don't know if you can hear the thunder and the lightning outside. There's a big storm here. So now I'm sitting in the dark with no electricity reading David Copperfield to you. It's a little creepy. That she should struggle against the fascinating influence of his delightful art. Delightful nature, I thought it then. It did not surprise me either, for I knew that she was sometimes jaundiced and perverse. I saw her features and her manners slowly change. I saw her look at him with growing admiration. I saw her try, more and more faintly, but always angrily, as if she condemned a weakness in herself, to resist the captivating power that he possessed. And finally, I saw her sharp glance soften, and her smile become quite gentle, and I ceased to be afraid of her, as I had really been all day, and we all sat about the fire, talking and laughing together, with as little reserve as if we had been children. Whether it was because we sat there so long, or because Steerforth was resolved not to lose the advantage he had gained, I do not know. But we did not remain in the dining room more than 5 minutes after her departure. "She is playing her harp," said Steerforth softly at the drawing-room door, "and nobody but my mother has heard her do that, I believe, these 3 years." He said it with a curious smile, which was gone directly, and we went into the room and found her alone. "Don't get up," said Steerforth, which she already had done. "My dear Rosa, don't. Be kind for once and sing us an Irish song." "What do you care for an Irish song?" she returned. "Much," said Steerforth, "much more than for any other. Here's Daisy, too, loves music from his soul. Sing us an Irish song, Rosa, and let me sit and listen as I used to do." He did not touch her or the chair from which she had risen, but sat himself near the harp. She stood beside it for some little while in a curious... Oh, good, the electricity's back. In a curious way, going through the motion of playing it with her right hand, but not sounding it. At length she sat down and drew it to her with one sudden action, and played and sang. I don't know what it was in her touch or voice that made that song the most unearthly I have ever heard in my life, or can imagine. There was something fearful in the reality of it. It was as if it had never been written or set to music, but sprung out of passion within her, which found imperfect utterance in the low sounds of her voice, and crouched again when all was still. I was dumb when she leaned beside the harp again, playing it, but not sounding it, with her right hand. We've talked about the word dumb before, and maybe you've seen it that it means stupid. That's how you would usually see the word dumb nowadays. But really all it meant before was silent, like can't talk. That's really what dumb used to mean. So when Davy says, "I was dumb" after she finished singing, that means I couldn't talk. I was unable to make words because I was so amazed at her singing at this song. Wellington Cardoso says, problem in the internet signal. Oh, could you hear me? The electricity went out, so for about 5 minutes I was on battery, so everything looked very dark and weird and creepy. But now the electricity is back. I'm having a rainstorm here. But that's kind of nice, drinking a big cup of coffee and lots of thunder and lightning outside and rain, and sitting in the dark and reading a book on the internet's kind of fun. A minute more, and this had roused me from my trance. Steerforth had left his seat and gone to her, and put his arm laughingly about her, and said, "Come, Rosa, for the future we will love each other very much." And she had struck him. Striking is hitting. So Steerforth is giving her a hug, and she... Leave me alone, I think. Let's see. And had thrown him off with the fury of a wild cat. Oh, yes, she was not even joking. She's like, "Get away from me. Don't touch me." And had burst out of the room. "What is the matter with Rosa?" said Mrs. Steerforth, coming in. "Rosa knows something. She's very angry with Steerforth for some reason. She knows something." "She has been an angel, mother," returned Steerforth, "for a little while, and has run into the opposite extreme since by way of compensation." So Steerforth is saying she's always so wonderful, she's always been such a wonderful person, that now she's decided to become the opposite of that, to compensate, to make up for it, to make up for lost time. You should be careful not to irritate her, James. Her temper has been soured, remember, and ought not to be tried. Rosa did not come back, and no other mention was made of her until I went with Steerforth into his room to say good night. Then he laughed about her, and asked me if I had ever seen such a fierce little piece of incomprehensibility. I expressed as much of my astonishment as then capable of expression, and asked if he could guess what it was that she had taken so much amiss so suddenly. "Oh, heaven knows," said Steerforth. "Anything you like or nothing. I told you she took everything, herself included, to a grindstone and sharpened it. She is an edge tool, and requires great care in dealing with. She is always very dangerous. Good night." "Good night," said I, "my dear Steerforth. I shall be gone before you wake in the morning. Good night." He was unwilling to let me go, and stood, holding me out, with a hand on each of my shoulders, and as he had done in my own room. "Daisy," he said with a smile, "for though that's not the name of your godfathers and godmothers gave you, it's the name I like best to call you by, and I wish you could give it to me." Huh? Well, let's read that again. "And I wish you could give it to me." "Why, so I can if I choose," said I. "Daisy, if anything should ever separate us, you must think of me at my best, old boy. Come, let us make that bargain. Think of me at my best, if circumstances should ever part us." So this is getting really kind of strange, because now Steerforth is talking in a very mysterious way, saying, if something ever happens where you get very angry with me, or we get separated somehow for some reason, always remember the good times that we had. So that's kind of interesting. Miss Dartle is extremely angry and nervous around Steerforth, and now he's saying, "Promise me that you'll always think of me like when we were boys in school." Uh-oh, what's going on? "You have no best to me, Steerforth," said I, "and no worst. You're always equally loved and cherished in my heart." So much compunction for having ever wronged him. Let's look at that word, compunction. I've seen that word before, but I don't really know what it means. Compunction, feeling of guilt or moral scruple that prevents or follows the doing of something bad. So Davy is feeling compunction. He's feeling guilt because earlier he was thinking maybe Agnes is right about him. Maybe he is a bad person. And he started really believing that. And now he feels very guilty and horrible that he ever thought such a thing. So much compunction for having ever wronged him, even by a shapeless thought I did not feel within me, that the confession of having done so was rising to my lips, but for the reluctance I had to betray the confidence of Agnes. So Davy was almost about to confess, "I'm sorry that I was thinking bad things about you," but he promised Agnes that he would never reveal this secret. So that stopped him. He almost said something, but he couldn't, because that would be a problem for Agnes. But for my uncertainty on how to approach the subject with no risk of doing so, it would have reached them before he said, "God bless you, Daisy, and good night." In my doubt, it did not reach them, and we shook hands and we parted. So Davy was trying to think of a way to talk to him about this situation, about people thinking that maybe he's bad, without indicating that Agnes was the one who pointed in that direction. So as he was thinking about that, how could he say it without betraying Agnes? Steerforth said good night, and Davy's like, okay, good night. He didn't say anything. The time came in its season, and that was very soon, when I almost wondered that nothing troubled his repose. As I looked at him, but he slept. Let me think of him so again, as I had often seen him sleep at school, and thus, in this silent hour, I left him. Nevermore. Oh, God forgive you, Steerforth, to touch that passive hand in love and friendship. Never, ever more. Oh, so it sounds like Davy is indicating that this was the last time that they would see each other as friends. He's writing this. These are his memoirs. Memoirs are when you remember your life many years later. So now he's kind of an older man, and he's writing about his past. So he already knows what's happening. And now he's saying that was the last time that we ever felt that kind of friendly connection. And then he says, never more. Never again. It will never come again. All right, well, that was the end of chapter 29 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. It was a short chapter, and I think normally I would try to read the next chapter, but since my electricity isn't being very reliable tonight, I think I'll stop here. And I think I'll try to come back again tomorrow night at the same time, and we'll read through chapter 30. All right, well, thank you for sticking around, and I hope to see you again tomorrow when we read chapter 30.